Message this morning, our scripture passage. So we are continuing on in this series where the Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama got together for a summit on joy, lifelong friends, and they came up with obstacles to joy and pillars of joy. And obviously, we want to minimize those obstacles in our life and cultivate those pillars of joy. So one of the obstacles to joy is anger. Anger, frustration, we have all experienced that. And an antidote to that maybe, or something that we can cultivate to relieve our anger, is forgiveness. So that's what we're talking about today. And Jesus, of course, had a lot to say about both of these things. So this is a rather short passage from the Gospel of Luke. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, anybody who completed the crossword, make sure you drop that off with Tim. You'll be entered into a drawing next week to be the reader.
Really?
No, but really, Meredith and I picked off her ear. We Children's Corner are going to put a little something in the bulletin each week to help keep your kid busy. So, and maybe some of you other folks did it too. The scripture this morning is from Luke chapter 6, verses 37 through 42. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. He also told them this parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? And how can you say to your neighbor, friend, let me take the speck in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
And now stand as you are able for the hymn of preparation, Grace Greater Than Our Sin.
Thank you, Tyler, for reminding me about the bulletin. There is a little fun thing in here for kids and for Dean, who already said he was looking forward to it. So last week we talked about gratitude and had an opportunity to center ourselves around the things we were grateful for this week. Did anybody write some things down or pay more attention? And good. And so we'll just do a little check-in about this. How did that feel, or what did you notice, or did it change your week in any way? Anything you want to share with folks? Oh, Beth, raise your hand, teacher Beth. Janine raised her hand, and so I'm going to call on her, but you can be next.
What I found was it was hard to say just 3 things.
Oh, hard to say just 3 things once you started thinking about it. It was an abundance. Okay.
I just noticed how many people, individual people, that I was thankful for.
How many people? How many individual people?
Like Dean and Cora,
Yeah.
and my friend Sally, and my
Yeah.
sister,
Yeah.
during the day, how they helped.
Yeah. So all those names started adding up, and you realized how big your world is. Yeah. I saw it. Yeah, Dean.
I had 3 in 1. Cora, nurse, cook, and wife.
Cora, 3 in 1. Cora, nurse, cook, and wife. Yeah. So, yeah, it helps you just be aware of things you might take for granted. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, gratitude for our dog, big gratitude.
Aw.
We get hearts more than people. I'm not sure what that says. But we really liked it. We think of ourselves as being pretty grateful people anyway, but writing it down puts another layer on that gratitude.
So gratitude for your dog, and that you think of yourselves as pretty grateful people anyway, but when you write it down, it puts another layer on it. Yeah. Don Lynn.
Nothing in particular, but just how the day went. I was starting my day with it, and then I was in a good mood all day.
Yeah. So it changed how your day went. So you started your day with it and put you in a good mood. So when you look for something, you see more of it, right? Yeah. Yeah, David.
I found it to be an easy assignment. I also found out there's more to be thankful for than less thankful. And started off with my wife, warm bed, running water, electricity, grandchildren. So much out there to be thankful.
Yeah. So much to be thankful for. Yeah. Yeah, Nancy.
Out on the deck to see the moon, full moon, and the clouds.
Wasn't it great?
And when I stepped out on the deck, I could hear the frogs, the croaking.
Oh, wow. So Nancy noticed the full moon, and she went out on the deck to see it, and then she could hear the frogs all around her. And so many things are so easy to miss. They're just so easy to miss. I don't know why. But when you can focus yourself on looking for the things you're grateful for, they're everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, Joyce.
And all my life, I've always loved the sunset.
Sunsets and sunrises. We get 2 every single day. Every single day. And most of the time we miss them. At least I miss them. But they're there, and those can be cues for us to stop and notice, be aware, think of the things we're grateful for. Yeah. Well, you get a bulletin every week. So you can do that every week, take it home. And I know most people recycle them, and that's just fine. But if you take it home, it can be a reminder of your week. I actually started doing this thing a couple weeks ago. It's an app on my phone, so not that we all need more screen time, but it's this app that will select, or you can select 1 second, like 1 picture a day. And at least on my phone now, all these pictures are live pictures, like you're in Harry Potter. You take a picture, but then it records like 3 seconds around the picture. So you can select 1 picture a day, and at the end of the month, you can play this little 30-second video of all these little clips from your month. And it's amazing how it helps you remember the things that you would overlook. I don't know why, but sometimes it's the bad things that get stuck in our head. It's the worries or the angers, the frustrations. And we forget that moment where, Anna and I made silly faces at each other, or Ollie was dribbling in his basketball game. And it just pulls those things out and helps you see. It's just another one of these tools to help you see what you have. Because when you look for it, you find it. When you look for it, there's more of it. When you look for it, you cultivate those things you're grateful for, those blessings. So that's a great practice. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing. It is a good practice to continue because there are a lot of things every day that do not make us feel grateful. Instead, make us feel angry. And I've heard this era described as perhaps the era of anger, or the era of indignation, or I'm missing a word there. But anyway, an era of, what is that word that I'm looking for? Not fury. All right, I'll get my thesaurus later. But there's a word that I just had until I started that sentence. But anger. It's just an angry era where we have all these tools now at our disposal to share our lives in every capacity. And a lot of our lives is frustration. And so what do? We share that frustration. And so what you used to share maybe with your spouse at the end of the day or with a friend on a phone call, now you can broadcast to the entire world. So whether you are mad about Comcast and that customer service call, or dealing with a health insurance agency, or with the politicians, or with, God forbid, each other, right? Our neighbors, and how can people think that blah, blah, blah. Whatever your anger is, you can now publicize that. And what does that do when you share it, when you read it? It's the opposite of that exercise we've just done, where we are looking for God's blessings, we are writing them down, we are sharing them, we are amazed by their abundance. When we share anger, the same thing happens. We see more of it, right? We're attuned to it. There's an injustice over here that makes us so angry, and soon we can see this injustice over here, and soon it feels like the ship is going down. And we're so angry. So let's contrast these two wise spiritual leaders, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And I've done a lot of just looking online for pictures from their meeting, and you can see on their faces that they are full of joy. That's why I'm trying to pick different pictures every week for the front of our bulletin, that they have all these moments where they're able to connect with each other, and their connections are not one of anger. They're not even one of dismay. They are gratitude, joy, humor, peace, kind of that sense of being overwhelmed by the goodness of life or even the heaviness of life, but they are in it together. I bet that you have someone in your life like these two people, somebody whose life was not easy, but who will always manage to be a person of grace and peace and gratitude in the midst of it. One person I was thinking of this week was one of my professors in seminary, Dr. Graybeal. I might have mentioned him before. He just passed away recently. I think he was 88 years old when he was my teacher. And a little fun thing about him was that he got married on the same day that Christopher and I got married. It was his second marriage after his wife passed away. But so he was a newlywed the same time we were newlyweds, with all the joy that goes with that. But Dr. Graybeal was a professor emeritus, and he only taught one class, and the class was called The Good Community. And he had been a pastor. He came home from World War II, went to seminary, and became a pastor. So he had been a pastor for decades and decades, and he knew how to live with a people and love them and be patient. He had seen all of their life hallmarks and milestones. And Dr. Graybeal had a little bit of a reputation for being kind of a pushover. I don't think anybody got below an A in the Good Community class. And so if you didn't get a paper in on time, it kind of didn't matter with him. But I think that's because he had seen so much that he knew a paper deadline is not the most important thing in the world. The most important thing is love and connecting in love. And so he was this very forgiving person. And he had seen a lot. He had done funerals you should never have to do. And he had seen pain in a community. But he was also that gentle, compassionate person. And I think that made him gentle with students. So he was always ready to listen to the things you were carrying and the burdens you had, and made him willing to be gentle with you about that paper deadline, right? So we probably all have somebody like that in our mind who has seen their share of the pain of life and yet has not let it erode them, not let it make them bitter or brittle. And how does that happen? So the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu shared some thoughts about this. And their most, the example that they gave the most was that they tried to separate the person from the wrongdoing. Now, both of these men have seen human rights atrocities. I mean, they have not led sheltered lives. They have seen horrid things. And so for them to say, we should separate the person from the act they commit, carries some weight, at least with me. They have seen people do some things. So the Dalai Lama talked about meeting a rabbi one time when he was traveling in Jerusalem. And the rabbi was teaching his people, who are Palestinians, actually, I have that wrong, it wasn't a rabbi, but there was a teacher in Palestine, and he was teaching the people, when you have to go through an Israeli checkpoint, imagine that the soldiers are created in the image of God. Just take a moment. It doesn't change your behavior. You don't do anything different. But as you're going through that checkpoint, keep in your mind that those soldiers are created in the image of God. And what people noticed as they went through is that they were calmer and they were more at peace. They were less afraid. And the Dalai Lama said, you have to be alert on a physical level, but in the mental level, the emotional level, you can remember that that person is created in the image of God just like you. And what does that do? It creates a kind of connection so that even though something scary may happen physically, ultimately there is something deeper at work. that God is still present, even in that very tense moment. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, of course, was part of the work to end apartheid. And he was part of this Truth and Reconciliation Committee. In fact, he led it. And so as that nation, South Africa, healed from apartheid, they had this truth-telling where anybody could come in and say what had been done. And so he said that they saw opportunities for forgiveness that never should have happened. People that you wouldn't think could possibly forgive that kind of atrocity. He said that he saw a group of mothers who were in the same room as a group who had killed their children. And he saw mothers get up and go to those perpetrators and touch their face and say, "My child, my child." That should never happen. But that act of forgiveness is possible. That was the centering quote we started with. Even in the most hopeless situations, God is still there. And so there is still possibility for transformation. And think about what a mother in that situation does. To lose a child, awful grief, but then compound it with the anger of being confronted with the person who took your child's life. So now there's anger on top of grief. And she could carry that around the rest of her life. But instead, she goes to the person who has committed this crime. And to commit this kind of crime is to erode your own humanity. To live with that for the rest of your life is something that ultimately would be unbearable. And so the mother who goes to that person and calls him her child really restores life. The life of the child who is gone cannot be restored. It cannot be fixed. But there's two other lives still at play, and they could be eaten away by anger. And instead, life is restored by that act of forgiveness. Now, when I hear stories like that, they're just so overwhelming. And you always wonder, what would I do? Would I be able to do that? But you know, we have opportunities every day to forgive. Maybe we would have an opportunity like that once or twice in our lifetime, something on that scale. But every day, aren't we confronted with little annoyances from the people around us? And after a while, as I was telling the kids, they get under our skin. That's such a great phrase. If they get under our skin far enough, they get into our hearts and into our spirit. And anger just wears you down. And so every day we have an opportunity to kind of let those things go, whether it's driving in traffic or scrolling on Facebook or your spouse at night who's eating those wrinkly snacks, we have an opportunity to let those things go and be restored. Anna came home from school one day this week. I think I've shared with you before. In the school system now, just this year, they've launched this whole new aspect of the education called social and emotional learning here in the Ridgefield School District. And so once a week or so, she has an SEL lesson. And their SEL lesson this week was about anger and what to do when you find yourself getting very angry. And so they have a video and there's a song, and Anna was singing the song, and the song teaches a 3-step process. The first is to use a cue word like chill or calm down, and you use that with yourself. This can be kind of like the sunset, or one of your other gratitude things. You can use that as a cue too, to remind you, I need some perspective on this. I have gotten in too deep, so I need some perspective. So that's the first word. Use a cue word to kind of get yourself a little bit out of it. And then the second one is to name the feeling. To name the feeling. This is so important for kids too, but also for grown-ups. Because sometimes we jump straight to the irateness or the anger, and we don't stop to think, why am I angry? This book says that anger is often a secondary emotion because we didn't get something we wanted or we got something we didn't want. And so anger is often a result of fear, that you're afraid you're not going to get what you need. So what are you feeling and why? Sometimes if you name that, again, it just helps to put perspective on things. And it's that old Mr. Rogers thing. Anything human is mentionable, and anything mentionable is manageable. So if you put a name to it, it stops being so scary, and it puts kind of a handle on it for you. And then the third thing they learned were some techniques to kind of physically calm down. So counting, they have this little thing where they trace their hand, just kind of connecting you to something outside that mental space. Deep breathing or positive self-talk. Use a little script in your mind, and that can be a cue too. So this is what our kids are learning in school, because it's so necessary. So Jesus also teaches us about forgiveness, right? And in this passage that we have today, he says, can a blind person lead a blind person? We all want to be people of joy. We want lives of joy, lives of peace, but we get angry. And sometimes we think anger is going to help us. But you cannot mad yourself into a joyful life. You can't just be angry enough to bring peace. That's not how it works. And so Jesus says, think about what you have in your own life that you can fix. We so often focus on other people, and we just let them into our lives. We let them take up residency in our hearts and minds over things that are actually pretty small. He says, think about what is in your life that you can control, that log in your own eye. Work on that. That is going to make a difference in your life. He even tells a little joke there at the end. He's like, if you take the log out of your eye, you'll have better sight to get that speck out of your neighbor's eye, First, get your whole life perfect, and then you can make everyone else's life perfect. So work on yourself. You cannot be angry enough to lead to anything good. Find a peace. He has this word about forgiveness, that if you forgive, you will be forgiven. Again, when I first read that passage earlier in my life, I would think it's kind of a transaction, right? If you forgive here, you get forgiveness there. If you give here, you'll get there. And it's like a whole big balance system. But I don't think that's how it works. I think it's what we experienced with that gratitude practice this week. Once you look for it, you realize this is the way of everything. You have people everywhere. The people you take for granted do so much for you. It's hard to codify it. This is the way forgiveness is. If you are able to let things go and let other people be themselves and account for just everybody's little weirdisms that they all have, you realize you have that too. And that people forgive you all the time too. Because I probably make some crinkly noises with my wrappers too. So the nature of God is forgiveness. Not if you forgive here, then you get one back at a later date. But if you forgive, you are suddenly in this stream of forgiveness. You are in this grace that is all around you. And that is how God works. So they have an exercise here in the back of the book to help us cultivate those pillars of joy. And so far, we have been working on cultivating the pillars. We haven't been working on reducing those obstacles. This week, I think this exercise is really good to help us deal with our anger, so we can continue on that exercise of gratitude. But here's something the Archbishop would do in those days of apartheid. He would pray every day for government officials, the ones who were perpetrating this oppression. And he would not just pray that they would be transformed, he would also pray for their own well-being. He would pray for their health. He would pray that their lives would be content and full. He was praying for his enemies, taking the words of Jesus very seriously. Now again, it's easy to think, well, why would you do that? Why would you pray that your enemies would have content and full lives? Are you just being soft and weak? Are you being a pushover? I mean, we cannot ask that of Desmond Tutu. He is not a pushover and he is not weak. And he says in the book, if anyone thinks it is weak to forgive, they really ought to try it. Because to forgive takes a lot of strength. Anybody can hold a grudge, but a great person can forgive. So, this is what he would do. He would literally pray for his enemies. So, our exercise this week is to have a time of prayer where we can center ourselves and focus on our own spiritual life. And then it says, think of the person who is upsetting you and say a prayer for them. Pray for their joy and happiness. Wish them well. Try this when you're on that next robocall and you're trying to dial 0 to get a real person. Pray for that person's joy and happiness. See them as a child of God, deserving God's love. So when somebody cuts you off on the freeway, you think to yourself, that is a child of God, and they deserve God's love as much as me. Think of them as another human being who shares your desire to be happy and avoid suffering. You see what happens when you pray for your enemies like this? It builds a connection between us. They are just like me. That's the opposite of how we usually go about it. If they are your enemy, they are different. They are polar opposites. They're your rival. You want to work against them. This reminds us that we are the same. That everybody, as our centering thought said, everybody is deeply human. Everybody is deeply good and inherently flawed. We are too. So, we're going to try it. Jesus has always been right? Jesus was right with the counting your blessings thing last week. So we will see if Jesus is right this week by praying for our enemies. He asks us to do it. Let's see what happens when we do. Thanks be to God. Amen. So we'll invite our